What would you do if the homeless man everyone thought was hiding a weapon stepped in front of Judge Caprio, opened his coat, and made an entire courtroom forget how to breathe? Drop a comment telling us what you think was hidden under that coat, because by the end of this story, you may never look at a stranger the same way again. At 9:14 on a gray Tuesday morning, inside the Providence Municipal Court at City Hall, case number 25 MC 11873 was supposed to be routine: a trespass citation, a petty theft complaint, a resisting arrest charge that looked open and shut. But before the clerk finished reading the file, something happened that turned a simple morning docket into the kind of moment people talk about for years. Hit that subscribe button if you believe justice should see more than a case number. Because this story starts with suspicion, turns into outrage, and ends with a revelation so powerful that even the bailiff on the wall-side aisle had to look away and wipe his eyes. The man at the center of it all was 62-year-old Daniel Mercer, a homeless Army veteran with a weathered jaw, silver stubble, and a faded olive Carhartt coat hanging 2 sizes too big over his frame. His boots were split at the soles. His jeans were old Levi's with the right knee whitened from years of kneeling on concrete and gravel. Under one sleeve, people could see hospital tape still stuck to his wrist. And under that coat there was a shape. Not small, not flat, not normal. Like this video, if you believe the first glance can lie to you. From the back row, a woman whispered, "Oh my God, is he carrying something?" The whisper spread fast. You know how a room changes when fear arrives before facts do. The air tightens, chairs stop squeaking, even paper sounds louder. Clerk Elena Russ looked up from the monitor and paused mid-sentence. Bailiff Marcus Doyle shifted one hand toward his belt. Assistant City Prosecutor Evan Pike, who had been half listening while sorting his files, suddenly stared at Daniel's chest like he expected metal to flash out of the lining. Judge Frank Caprio leaned forward, calm as ever, hands folded. "Mr. Mercer," he said in that measured voice people recognized the second it filled the room, "before we go any further, I'm going to ask you a simple question. What's under your coat?" Daniel didn't answer. His jaw flexed once. He looked at the floor, then at the seal behind the bench, then back at the judge. "Something that doesn't belong to this court." That answer did not help. Share this with someone who needs to see how fast people can judge a man before they hear a word of his story. Because in that instant, almost everyone in that room decided who Daniel Mercer was. A thief, a drifter, a dangerous man playing games in a courtroom full of people with nowhere to run. No one saw the whole picture yet, not the cracked inhaler in his pocket, not the VA envelope folded soft from being opened too many times, not the private war still raging behind his eyes. And definitely not the reason he had been arrested 3 nights earlier outside Hathaway's pharmacy on Broad Street, where surveillance footage showed him stuffing something under his coat and limping into freezing rain while Officer Melissa Grant shouted for him to stop. That footage had already made the rounds through 3 desks, 2 supervisors, and 1 city prosecutor who believed the case would take less than 5 minutes. He was wrong. Elena cleared her throat and read the summary anyway. Defendant Daniel Mercer, charged with misdemeanor shoplifting under city ordinance, 1 count of trespass after warning and 1 count of resisting lawful detention. Incident date November 18, 2025. Location, Hathaway's Pharmacy Annex Donation Staging Area, 227 Broad Street, Providence, Rhode Island. Reporting Officer, Patrol Officer Melissa Grant. Secondary Complainant, Nolan Pierce, Acting Store Manager. Daniel kept his hands at his sides. The cuffs were gone, but you could still see the red half-moons on his wrists. Evan Pike stood, 36 years old, sharp navy suit, polished shoes, the kind of haircut that told you he never ran late. He adjusted his tie and glanced toward the gallery before speaking like he already knew how the story was supposed to end. Your Honor, the city is prepared to show clear video evidence that Mr. Mercer knowingly removed merchandise from a restricted charity inventory area after being warned to leave the premises. When confronted by Officer Grant, he became combative, shoved her hard enough to cause a documented wrist injury, and attempted to conceal the stolen items under his coat. There it was. Stolen items. Combative. Conceal. Words that stick fast. Daniel looked up sharply. I didn't steal from anybody. Pike didn't even look at him. The footage suggests otherwise. No, Daniel said, louder this time. The footage suggests you've only watched the part that makes you comfortable. That got a reaction. A low rustle. From the benches. A little girl in the third row leaned against her mother's arm. A man in a Bruins cap muttered, "Here we go." Judge Caprio raised one finger. The room quieted. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "you'll have your chance. Mr. Pike, so will you. Nobody's going to outrun the truth in my courtroom." That line landed. You could feel it. And still, nobody stopped staring at the bulge beneath Daniel's coat. It rose high over his chest and wrapped awkwardly under one side, as if he were carrying a box, or strapping something fragile beneath the fabric, or hiding something he'd rather be arrested than surrender. The judge noticed where everyone's eyes kept drifting. "Mr. Mercer," he said again, softer this time, "I'm going to ask you one more time. Is there anything under that coat that could pose a danger to anyone in this room?" Daniel swallowed. His throat moved hard. "No danger," he said. "Then why not show it?" For the first time, Daniel's expression broke. Not fear, not exactly. Pain. The kind a proud man feels when being asked to open the last locked door he has left. He looked past the judge, past the clerk, past the flag and the bench and the nervous prosecutor, to the side wall where the old brass clock read 9:18. "Because once I do," he said, voice low and rough, "nobody in here gets to pretend they didn't see." That was the moment the room changed. Not because anyone understood him. Because everyone realized this case was hiding something bigger than a petty theft file. Evan Pike asked permission to proceed, and Caprio nodded. Pike called Officer Melissa Grant first. She stepped forward in uniform, left wrist still taped under the cuff. She was 31, compact, steady, with the kind of face that didn't waste expression. Her body cam had captured the arrest. Her report had framed the city's case. And when she took the oath, the room leaned in. "Officer Grant," Pike began, "walk the court through what you observed on the evening of November 18th. Grant nodded. At approximately 7:42 p.m., I responded to Hathaway's Pharmacy Annex after dispatch received a complaint about a male subject removing winter merchandise from a charity sorting area behind the store. When I arrived, I saw Mr. Mercer carrying items under his coat. Store manager Nolan Pierce had already warned him that the materials had not yet been logged, tagged, or released. Did the defendant comply when you approached?" "No, sir." "What did he say?" Grant glanced toward Daniel, then back to Pike. "He said, 'You don't get to stop me tonight.'" A few heads turned. Pike continued, "Then what happened?" "I instructed him to place the items down and keep his hands visible. He backed away. I repeated the command. He became agitated, raised his voice, and when I reached for his arm, he shoved me with both hands." "How hard?" "Hard enough that I lost balance against the curb edge and twisted my wrist." "Did he flee?" "Yes, southbound toward Pearl Street." "Did you recover the items?" "Eventually, yes." "And were those items store property at the time?" "Yes." Daniel gave a bitter laugh under his breath. Caprio looked at him. "You'll speak in a moment." Pike turned toward the monitor. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, the city would like to play a portion of Officer Grant's body cam and the exterior surveillance footage from the Hathaway loading entrance. The screen flickered. First came surveillance. Black and white, grainy but clear enough. Timestamp 19:39:12. Rain needled through the frame under yellow lot lights. A man in a heavy coat, Daniel, stood near rolling bins stacked with winter donations. He looked over both shoulders. Then he pulled two small puffer coats and a larger navy overcoat from the top bin. He tucked them under his own coat, turned, and walked fast toward the alley. Gasps. Soft but real. There it was, the thing everyone had wanted from the beginning. A simple image, a clean villain, a clip that could spread online with a caption like "Homeless Veteran Caught Stealing from Charity Drive." The kind of video millions would watch without asking what happened 30 seconds before or 10 minutes after. The second clip began. Body cam. Officer Grant's breathing in cold air, her flashlight beam shaking over wet pavement, her voice sharp and procedural. "Sir, Providence Police, stop right there." Daniel on camera turning too fast, eyes wide, one hand clamped over his coat. "Don't," he barked. "Put the items down. Don't touch me. Sir, place them on the ground now." Then the camera jolted hard, a scuffle, one sharp cry from Grant, a scrape of boots. Daniel's voice rose from angry to something stranger, something fractured. Back off, I said don't put your hands on me." The sound did not feel like theft anymore. It felt like panic. But the image on screen was bad for him, very bad. The shove was visible, the officer stumbled, Daniel ran. When the clip ended, the prosecutor didn't need to do much. The OM had seen what it needed to see. Or what it thought it needed. Pike folded his hands. "Your Honor, the city does not minimize military service, homelessness, or hardship, but none of those conditions permit assaulting an officer or stealing inventory meant for people in need. This defendant took from a charity drive. A charity drive, Your Honor, for children and families heading into the first freeze warning of the season." Outrage moved through the gallery like current through wire. A man in the back said too loudly, "Throw the book at him." Someone else whispered, "Disgusting." Daniel turned his head but said nothing. The judge noticed his hands first, not clenched, not defensive. Shaking. Tiny tremors in both hands, as if cold had sunk into the bones and stayed there. Caprio rested his chin lightly on one hand. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "this is your chance. You heard the evidence. You heard the officer. You heard the prosecutor. Tell me what happened." Daniel took a breath that seemed to hurt. "What happened," he said, "is everybody in this room loves the part where a picture makes life easy." Pike rolled his jaw. Daniel kept going. "You want easy? Fine, I was there. I took the coats. I shoved the officer. I ran. That part's true." Murmurs. Even Caprio leaned back a fraction. Daniel lifted his eyes to the bench. "But I did not take those coats from me. I did not touch that officer because I thought I was above the law, and I didn't run because I'm some predator in a parking lot. I ran because the minute she grabbed me from behind, I wasn't on Broad Street anymore." Silence. Not full belief. But attention. Pike stepped in. "Your Honor, the defendant is attempting to explain away direct evidence." Daniel snapped toward him. "No, I'm trying to finish the evidence." Caprio raised a palm. "You'll finish it with me, not with him. Why were you at that donation area?" Daniel hesitated. His eyes cut to the gallery, where a woman in a tan coat sat with two children, one boy, one girl. The little girl's hands were buried in her sleeves. Daniel looked away so fast it almost seemed like shame. Then he said, "Because two kids at St. Agnes Overflow Shelter were freezing." That changed the temperature again. Not the whole room. But enough. "Names?" Caprio asked. Ava Bell 8, Tommy Bell 11. The woman in the tan coat lowered her eyes. The judge noticed that too. Daniel continued, voice flat at first, then rougher. I know them because the church lets me help serve on Thursdays if I stack chairs after. Tommy's coat zipper broke clean off last week. Ava's been wearing a hoodie with a plastic poncho under it. She coughs like old engine parts. That night the weather radio said 28 degrees by midnight. I saw those coats outside Hathaway's, and I asked if they were being taken to St. Agnes. The man there said no, not until Friday inventory. I said Friday was too late. He told me to move along. Pike cut in. That man was Nolan Pierce, and he denies refusing an emergency request. Daniel stared at him. Of course he does. Caprio did not take the bait. Mr. Mercer, did you ask anyone else for help? Yes. Who? Front cashier, young kid with braces, told me to talk to the manager. I did. Did you offer money? Daniel laughed once, humorless. I offered everything I had. How much was that? He reached slowly into his pocket. Marcus Doyle took one half step forward until Caprio gave him the slightest nod to hold. Daniel pulled out a clear sandwich bag. Inside were quarters, dimes, nickels, and 2 crumpled $1 bills. The room stared. That was $16.42, Daniel said. I counted it twice in the rain. The blue kid's coat had a yellow clearance tag on it, $12.99. The pink one was $9. I figured if I begged enough, maybe he'd let one go and I'd find another somewhere else. You could hear Alina Russo stop typing. Pike's voice stayed clipped. And when the manager refused, you decided to steal 3 coats instead of 1. Daniel's face hardened. No, I decided inventory can wait longer than a child's lungs. That line hit so hard, several people actually inhaled at once. It was the first shareable quote of the morning. The kind that would later get repeated in comments and clipped over reaction videos and courtroom channels, because it felt like something bigger than a defense. But Caprio wasn't finished. And why, the judge asked quietly, did you shove the officer? Daniel's answer came slower. Because she touched my arm from behind, left side. He swallowed. And for about 3 seconds I was 24 again, kneeling next to a burning Humvee outside Safwin while Ortiz screamed for morphine I didn't have. Nobody moved. Even Evan Pike stopped, pretending not to feel it. Officer Grant looked down at her own report, then back up. Daniel's voice fell to a near whisper. I know where I was after, I know I hurt her, I know I ran, I know every bad thing video shows. But before anybody in here decides I'm a man who steals from children, maybe ask why the coats ended up on children anyway. Caprio looked toward the woman in the tan coat. Ma'am, would you please stand and tell the court your name? The woman stood slowly, one hand on the shoulder of the little girl beside her. Teresa Bell, she said. That's my daughter Ava and my son Tommy. And suddenly, nothing about this case felt routine anymore. Before we go one step further, drop a comment if you believe one missing detail can change an entire story. Judge Caprio let the silence breathe before speaking again. Ms. Bell, are you involved in this matter? Teresa nodded. Her eyes were red already, though she hadn't cried yet. Yes, Your Honor. In what way? She looked toward Daniel. He didn't meet her gaze. In the way that my kids are alive and warm because of him. There it was. The first revelation that changed everything. You could feel it land in the room like weight. Pike recovered first. Your Honor, with respect, if this witness is here to discuss receipt of property after the theft, that does not excuse. Caprio cut him off without raising his voice. Counselor, when the truth knocks, you don't ask it to wait in the hallway. Second shareable quote. Even Pike blinked. Teresa Bell moved to the witness area with Ava holding her hand and Tommy trailing close behind in a Patriots knit cap that sat too low over one eye. Teresa was 34, a home health aide whose hours had been cut after a back injury. Her tan coat was clean but old. The cuffs had been resewn with blue thread that didn't match. She took the oath with the careful seriousness of someone who knew words mattered when you didn't have much else. "Tell me what happened," Caprio said. Teresa exhaled. "We were at St. Agnes shelter on the 18th. Ava had been sick 4 days. She was coughing hard, wheezing bad. The shelter had blankets, but the heat kept cutting in and out because of boiler problems. Tommy's coat was too small. Ava didn't really have one. Mr. Mercer came in after dark with 3 coats and 2 pairs of gloves. He gave the blue one to Tommy, the pink one to Ava, the bigger navy one to another man sleeping near the side entrance." Pike narrowed his eyes. "Did he tell you where the coats came from?" Teresa hesitated. Daniel looked like he wanted the floor to open. "He said," Teresa answered carefully, "he said, 'Don't ask me a question that makes me choose between honesty and helping.'" That got another reaction. Because it was messy, human, not clean enough to absolve him, not dirty enough to condemn him easily. Caprio asked, "Did he ask for anything in return?" "No, Your Honor." "Did he keep one of the coats?" "No." "Did he stay?" Teresa looked down, then smiled through strain. "Just long enough to make my boy put both arms through the sleeves the right way." Tommy sniffed and rubbed his nose. Ava leaned against her mother and looked at Daniel with the solemn recognition children sometimes give the adults who showed up on their worst days. Caprio turned to the little girl. "Ava, do you know who Mr. Mercer is?" She nodded once. "Who is he?" "The man who said cold can trick you into thinking sleep is a good idea." No one in that room will ever forget how small her voice sounded when she said that. It was one of those lines, so simple it slices deeper than anything rehearsed. Caprio's expression softened. "Did he help you?" "Yes, sir." "How?" She touched the zipper of the pink puffer coat she was wearing right there in court. That was when half the gallery understood what they were looking at. The exact coat from the footage. The exact coat the city called stolen property. The exact coat now wrapped around the body of an 8-year-old, whose cheeks still held the pale, waxy tone of a child recovering from fever. Pike stepped forward. "Your Honor, no one disputes that the child received the coat. The issue is how it was obtained." Caprio nodded. "The court understands the issue." Teresa's eyes filled now. "Can I say one more thing?" "You may." "The ambulance came at 2:11 that morning," she said. "Rhode Island Hospital. They said Ava had early pneumonia and her oxygen was bad. One nurse told me if she'd stayed out in that wet hoodie another few hours, she might have crashed harder before anybody caught it." Teresa wiped her nose with the back of her hand. "I know theft is theft. I know that. But when people say he stole from children, that's backwards. He stole for one." The room broke into whispers. Everyone in the room knew that if this were a video online, it would already be exploding, because the story had turned upside down in front of them, and human beings are drawn to moments when certainty collapses. But Caprio wasn't smiling. He wasn't indulging the sentiment. He was building a record. "Ms. Bell," he said, "did you bring any hospital documentation?" She nodded and held up a folded packet. "Angela Ruiz from the Shell. Tur helped me." Elena Russo took the papers, passed them to the judge, then to the prosecutor. Angela Ruiz was called next. 46. Shelter Outreach Coordinator. Black wool coat. Sensible shoes. A face shaped by too many winters listening to impossible stories and deciding which crisis had to wait behind the others. She testified that Daniel Mercer volunteered off and on at St. Agnes, refused to take extra food until children had eaten, and often slept outside rather than take a bed from older residents when the shelter was full. Pike pressed, "Are you saying the defendant is a model citizen?" "No," Angela said. "Did he break rules at the shelter?" "Yes." What kind of rules? He disappears for days, refuses intake forms, won't stay for counseling, won't give staff the names of his relatives, walks out when panic attacks start, comes back bleeding sometimes and says he fell. So he is unstable. Angela looked at him without flinching. No, he is injured in ways your file doesn't have boxes for. Third shareable quote. Even Marcus Doyle, who had started the morning ready to pin Daniel against the rail if the coat moved wrong, shifted his stance. Pike changed direction. Did Mr. Mercer have lawful permission to remove inventory from Hathaway's? No. Did you instruct him to wait until the next morning for an outreach request? Yes. And did he ignore you? Angela inhaled slowly. Yes. So he made a unilateral decision to take property that was not his. He made a desperate decision in a broken system, where urgency moves slower than paperwork. The judge took that one in. Then he turned back to Daniel Mercer. Mr. Mercer, Caprio said, stand up straight and look at me. Daniel did. You are not being accused of failing to care. You are being accused of breaking the law while caring. Those are not the same thing. Daniel's mouth tightened. Caprio continued, I hear why you took the coats. I hear why you believed time mattered. But there is still an officer with an injured wrist, a manager with a complaint, and a public process you decided not to respect. That matters too. Do you understand me? Daniel gave the smallest nod. No, Caprio said, with words. Yes, Your Honor. Good, then I'm going to ask you again. What is under your coat? Everything stopped. Teresa looked at him. Angela looked at him. Officer Grant's face changed first, because suddenly she understood the judge wasn't talking about danger anymore. He was talking about the secret Daniel had been carrying through the whole morning. Daniel closed his eyes for one long second. Then he said, permission to remove it myself. You have it. You could hear the building, pipes, heat, someone coughing 2 rooms away, a bus braking outside on Dorrance Street, all the little sounds people never notice until silence becomes a living thing. Daniel reached up with both hands. His fingers shook so hard the first button slipped. Then the second. Then the third. The old Carhartt coat opened. And the courtroom gasped. Not a theatrical gasp. Not the kind people fake. This was shock stripped clean. Because under the ripped outer coat, Daniel Mercer was wearing his army dress blues. Perfectly pressed. Ribbon rack aligned. Combat medical badge over the left breast. Bronze star. Purple heart. Meritorious service medal. Unit patch still clean enough to catch the overhead light. And strapped against the medals, tucked carefully inside the inner lining like something holy, was a tiny pink Columbia children's coat with a hospital ID band looped through the sleeve. Aves. There were also letters. Dozens of them. Folded and refolded until the creases looked white. Pinned into the lining in neat rows with old brass safety pins. The room didn't just go silent. It froze. Marcus Doyle took a step back. Elena Russo pressed her hand over her mouth. One older man in the gallery whispered, Dear God. From the bench, Judge Caprio didn't say a word for 3 full seconds. Because what they were seeing was bigger than a surprise object. It was a whole life hidden in layers. Raggedness over honor. Homelessness over service. Pride over pain. And a child's coat held against military medals, like the 2 most important things he had left in the world. If this moment hit you, like this video if you believe dignity can survive even when everything else falls apart. Caprio finally spoke. Mr. Mercer explained this. Daniel did not look at the gallery. He looked only at the judge. The dress blues, he said, are all I got left that still fit the man I used to be. No one breathed. I wear the old coat over them because people steal what looks valuable. They leave rags alone. He touched one of the letters. These are from families, men I treated, men I lost, men I got home. I keep them on me because shelters get cleaned out. Storage lockers cost money, and if somebody takes my pack, I can maybe replace a blanket. I can't replace names. Then he touched the pink coat tucked again. It's in his chest. This stayed dry because I kept it here after Ava got admitted. They discharged her yesterday afternoon. I was bringing it back to her after court. Teresa Bell began to cry openly. Ava stared with wide, stunned eyes, like she finally understood why the man who always looked worn out somehow stood in front of the judge dressed like a memory from a better world. Pike tried to stay inside the law. You could see him fighting to keep the emotional tide from drowning the case. Your Honor, while the display is moving, it does not change the defendant's conduct on the night in question. Caprio turned slowly toward him. You're right, he said. It doesn't erase the conduct, it illuminates the man. Fourth shareable quote. That one didn't just land, it echoed. Daniel kept his coat open now, and with it open, the damage showed too. Below the ribbon bar, just visible at the collar line, were thick white scars climbing up the left side of his chest and neck. His undershirt was cut lower than standard issue, and you could see the edge of an old surgical line running down toward his sternum. Officer Grant noticed it and frowned. Caprio noticed her noticing. Officer, he said, did you observe any medical devices or injuries when Mr. Mercer was taken into custody? Grant straightened. At the station, yes. He had rib binding on the left side and signs of prior thoracic surgery. EMT triage noted probable chronic pain and anxiety response. Was that in your original incident summary? No, Your Honor. Why not? She hesitated. I focused on the resisting charge and the property recovery. Daniel gave a bitter nod, as if that answer fit a pattern he had known a long time. Caprio didn't pounce. He just recorded the truth by speaking it plainly. So the file before this court shows a shove, a flight, and stolen coats. It does not show a decorated veteran with visible trauma, medical scarring, or the fact that the coats were transferred immediately to children in a cold shelter. Grant lowered her eyes. No, Your Honor. That mattered. Because now the case was not just about what Daniel had done. It was about what the system had failed to see. But the judge was too experienced to turn one blind spot into sainthood. He looked at Daniel again. Open coat or not, medals or not, those facts do not put Officer Grant's wrist back together. Do you understand that? Yes, sir. Did you push her? Yes. Did you run? Yes. Did you believe the law should make an exception because your motive was good? Daniel's face tightened. At the time, yes. And now? Long pause. No, Daniel said. Now I think Payne is a lousy lawyer. That line almost nobody expected. Because it was the first time Daniel sounded less like a cornered man and more like someone beginning to tell the truth without defending every inch of himself. The judge nodded once. Good, we're getting somewhere. Then he looked toward Pike. Mr. Pierce is here. Nolan Pierce rose from the gallery with visible reluctance. 39. Manager's haircut. Columbia quarter zip under a brown overcoat. Too confident at first until the room had already turned against the easy version of his story. He took the stand and swore in. Pike led him through the basics. Donation area, not yet inventoried. Liability concerns, procedure, warning issued, defendant non-compliant. Then Caprio asked his own question. Mr. Pierce, when Mr. Mercer approached you that evening, did he ask for one coat at clearance value? Pierce shifted. He mentioned something about kids, yes. Did he offer you money? I don't recall exact. Do you recall coins in a plastic bag? Pierce hesitated just a little too long. Yes. Did you refuse? I told him donations had to be processed. There are rules. Did you contact any emergency shelter or outreach coordinator to verify whether those children needed coats immediately? No, because that isn't our standard protocol. Did you call anyone in authority besides police? No. Caprio's gaze sharpened. So a man told you 2 children were cold, offered you all the money he had, and your answer was to protect procedure. Pierce stiffened. Your Honor, with respect, we can't let people raid donation inventory every time they tell a story. Daniel laughed once through his nose. Caprio looked straight at Pierce. Nobody said you had to let anyone raid anything. I asked whether compassion ever entered the conversation before you dialed enforcement. Pierce had no good answer. Pike tried to redirect. The issue is not whether Mr. Pierce could have been kinder. The issue is whether the defendant had legal authority. And the court will decide that, Caprio said, with the full truth, not the convenient slice of it. By now the room had gone beyond curiosity. This was one of those hearings where everyone knew they were watching something bigger than an ordinance violation, a morality play, a mirror, the kind of courtroom moment viewers clip, title, and share because it reveals how quickly society can separate law from humanity and how much damage gets done in that gap. The judge asked for the complete surveillance file, not the trimmed segment. Pike looked surprised. Your Honor, the city only introduced the relevant portion. Then I'd like the irrelevant portion too. Elena Russo almost smiled. There was a short delay while a clerk from the annex emailed the original upload. People shifted. Teresa knelt to whisper something to Ava. Tommy kept glancing at Daniel's medals the way boys look at heroes when they realize heroism can grow old and tired and still remain. Daniel stood with his coat open the entire time. Not for effect. Because once he had revealed it, closing it again would have felt like running. Officer Grant kept glancing at the scars near his collar. Finally, the full file loaded. Timestamp 19:36:41. 3 minutes earlier than the clip the city had shown. Same lot, same rain, same bins. Daniel approached slowly, limping. Nolan Pierce stood near the loading door with a phone in one hand. Audio was weak, but lip reading wasn't necessary for the first part. Daniel held out the plastic bag of coins. Nolan waved him off. Daniel pointed toward the street, then made the height motion people make when describing children. Nolan shook his head. Then something crucial happened. Daniel reached toward one small blue coat hanging half off the bin. Nolan slapped his hand away. The gallery reacted instantly. You could see it on the screen. Not violence, not a fight, just a sharp, dismissive motion that changed the moral shape of everything that followed. Daniel stood there for several seconds, rain running off the brim of his hood, money still in his hand. Then he looked down the alley, looked back at the coats, and made the choice that put him where he was now. He took them. Wrong legally. Clear now emotionally. And no one in that room could pretend otherwise. Before the judge could speak, Officer Grant raised her hand slightly. Your Honor. He nodded. I'd like the court to know, she said. I did not see this part of the footage before today. Pike's head turned. Grant continued, measured but honest. I received the complaint as a theft in progress. By the time I arrived, I saw movement, concealment, and refusal to comply. That is what I responded to. Caprio said, and if you had seen this. Grant took a breath. I would still have had to address the unauthorized removal, but I would have approached it differently. Daniel looked at her for the first time since she took the stand. Differently. That word mattered more than an apology would have at that moment. Caprio leaned back and folded his hands. The law, he said, likes nouns, theft, trespass, resistance, but human beings are verbs, hurting, freezing, failing, regretting, trying, and if a court forgets that, all it does is process misery. Fifth shareable quote. No one spoke. Then Caprio turned to Daniel. Mr. Mercer, I want the rest of your story, not the heroic version, not the broken version, the true one. Why are you sleeping in shelters and alleys wearing medals under a ragged coat? And this was where the case stopped being about one night and became about the years that built it. Daniel stared at the floor for so long people started to think he wouldn't answer. Then he did. My wife died on June 3, 2022, he said. Leila Mercer, pancreatic cancer, Roger Williams Hospital, room 614. We had 28 years and 9 months. She used to say if I ever got lost, she'd find me by my bad knees and worse opinions. A quiet laugh broke the tension, then faded. She handled paperwork, bills, appointments, the things that keep a life from sliding. After she died, the house went 6 months, then 7. Mortgage notices, utility shutoffs. I sold the Silverado, sold tools, missed VA reviews, missed disability hearings because I couldn't sit in waiting rooms without feeling like my skin was full of bees. My daughter stopped answering after I told her not to come by high. She was using then, maybe still is. I don't know. He touched the line of one letter in his coat, but didn't remove it. The apartment after the house had mold, then a ceiling leak, then a landlord who liked cash and hated excuses. By last winter I was in a 2007 Ford Econoline van behind India Point Park. Transmission died in February. After that, I was wherever the weather lost interest. It was simple the way truth often is. No melodrama. No begging. Just one disaster failing to stop before the next one arrived. Caprio asked, and the dress blues? Daniel answered without hesitation. Leila made me promise never to pawn them. Have you pawned anything else? He smiled faintly. Just about everything that could fit in a bag. Why keep the letters pinned inside? Because if I leave them anywhere, I start thinking maybe those men only existed in my head. The judge let that sit. Then Angela Ruiz asked permission to add something. Caprio granted it. She held up a manila folder. These are outreach intake notes from the last 11 months. Mr. Mercer refused housing 3 times. Pike jumped on it, so services were available. Angela didn't flinch. Conditional services, shared rooms, tight indoor spaces, mandatory overnight check-ins. He has panic episodes around enclosed exits and male shouting. That's in the notes too. Caprio asked Daniel, why refuse housing if you were sleeping outside? Daniel's answer came fast. Because 4 walls do mean safe to everybody. That line hit some people differently. Especially Officer Grant. Especially Teresa. Especially the old veteran in the Bruins cap, who now had both elbows on his knees and eyes fixed on the floor. Angela added, we also have records from the Providence VA mobile clinic recommending trauma counseling and follow-up imaging on chronic lung scarring. Did he attend? Pike asked. No. Why not? Caprio asked Daniel. He hesitated. Then he said, because sitting in waiting rooms makes me feel like I'm standing next to all the men I couldn't save. There was the crack. Small but visible. The first emotional breakdown wasn't loud. It was contained. A proud man letting one true sentence leave his mouth without wrestling it to the ground first. Before the next reveal, hit subscribe if you believe strength is not the same thing as silence. The judge asked for Officer Grant back to the stand. This time, his questions were different. Officer, after the defendant was apprehended, did he say anything of note? Grant looked down at her notes, then at Daniel. At booking, when EMT was checking his blood pressure, he asked whether the little girl got the pink coat. Teresa covered her face. Caprio said nothing, waiting. Grant continued. When I told him I didn't know, he said, then write me up fast so I can pray with a purpose. Not many lines survive beyond a courtroom. That one did. Pike tried to steer back, and yet he still resisted. Grant nodded. Yes, he did. Your wrist injury. Grade 1 sprain, brace for 3 weeks, limited duty. Could you lift your daughter during that time? Caprio asked suddenly. Grant looked surprised. No, Your Honor. The judge nodded. I wanted that on the record too. Because this was the other side. The harm Daniel caused. Not abstract, not minor. A mother who couldn't lift her own child because a frightened man shoved her hard enough to twist bone and tendon. That mattered. It had to matter. Otherwise, the story became propaganda instead of truth. Caprio turned toward Daniel. Did you hear that? Yes. Look at Officer Grant. Daniel did. Now tell her what you have not told anyone yet. Daniel's throat worked. He looked like he'd rather stand in winter rain for 3 days than say what came next. I'm sorry, he said. Caprio shook his head slightly. Not enough. Daniel blinked. Try again, the judge said. That was the choice moment. The one every redemption arc requires. Not just whether a person regrets consequence, but whether he can finally see the wound he caused beyond his own suffering. Daniel looked at Grant's taped wrist. His own hand started shaking harder. When you grabbed me, he said, I disappeared. That's true, but you didn't. You were still there on the ground doing your job, and I made you pay for a battlefield you never saw. That wasn't right. It wasn't honorable, and it wasn't yours to carry. I am sorry for hurting you. Grant's face changed. A lot of people can say sorry. Very few can name the exact theft inside the harm they caused. Caprio watched her. Officer. She took a slow breath. Thank you. The room exhaled with her. Not resolution yet, but movement. Then came the but wait, there's more twist no one expected. Alina Russo stepped quietly to the bench and handed Caprio a note. He read it, then lifted his eyes toward the rear door. Ms. Ruiz, he said, is Dr. Ruben Hale here? Angela turned. A man in a charcoal suit stood from the back row and came forward. Mid-50s, VA psychiatrist, wire-rimmed glasses, tired eyes, one of those doctors who carry around too much memory of other people's worst days. He had not been scheduled. He had come on his own. Caprio allowed him to speak after brief foundation. Dr. Hale testified that Daniel Mercer had been seen intermittently through veteran outreach since 2023. Diagnoses included severe post-traumatic stress disorder, complicated grief, survivor guilt, chronic neuropathic pain, and untreated pulmonary fibrosis, likely linked to service-related exposure and earlier blast injury. Pike objected at first, then sat down when Caprio overruled him on relevance. Dr. Hale continued. Mr. Mercer presents with what many people casually call hypervigilance, but that word doesn't begin to cover it. He startles from rear contact, avoids closed spaces, experiences dissociative episodes under stress, and has intense shame responses around receiving charity. Shame responses, Caprio asked. Yes, he believes accepting help without earning it dishonors the men he served with. Daniel closed his eyes. Dr. Hale wasn't done. He also carries a specific unresolved fixation around one specialist, Leon Ortiz, who died during a convoy incident in 2004. Mr. Mercer has repeatedly stated he still hears Ortiz asking for help. Under stress, he reorients to that event. Caprio asked quietly, would unexpected physical contact trigger that? It could, yes. Would that excuse an assault? No, Your Honor. Would it explain one? Yes. That distinction mattered. Mercy needed explanation, not erasure. Then Dr. Hale produced something else. A sealed white envelope. I'm reluctant to submit this, but I think the court should see it. Mr. Mercer gave it to our clinic intake desk 6 weeks ago with instructions to open only if he disappeared or was arrested. The room stirred. Caprio looked at Daniel. Did you write a letter? Daniel's face went pale. I forgot about that. The judge held the envelope up. Do you object to the court reading it? Daniel stared at it like it had walked back from the dead. No, he said at last. Might as well hear what I sound like when I'm a coward. Caprio opened it. The paper inside was lined notebook stock, written in careful block print. He read silently at first, then aloud when the room had leaned so far forward it felt like one body. If this gets opened, it means I either ran out of money, luck, or nerve. If I'm dead, tell Ava Bell the pink coat was always hers, not borrowed. Tell Tommy Bell a zipper is not a character flaw. Tell whoever's left that I was trying to leave one decent thing behind before my lungs quit or my courage did. No one moved. Caprio kept reading. I do not want pity. I want accuracy. I was brave once in the places men clap for. I have been less brave in the quiet places since. If I hurt somebody while trying to do one good thing, make sure the good thing and the hurt are both written down. There it was. The moral complexity the room had been circling all morning. Not saint, not monster. A man begging in the most stubborn way possible to be seen whole. The judge folded the letter carefully. Then Daniel added, voice almost gone, there's another page. Caprio found it. Read. If there is any money left from my pension back pay, use it to get Tommy a proper winter coat too. Blue if possible. He pretends not to care about color, but he does. Tommy Bell burst into tears. Not loud, just sudden and complete the way boys try to stop but can't. Teresa pulled him close. Ava was crying now too. And all around them, people who had walked into court expecting entertainment or routine or some small satisfying sentence were sitting inside something much heavier. Something that forced them to ask what justice is supposed to do with human damage when it arrives wrapped in guilt and metals and wet winter fabric. Before we get to the moment that broke the courtroom open, like this video, if you believe accountability and compassion can exist in the same sentence. Caprio called a recess of 7 minutes. No one really left. They just stood, shifted, whispered, trying to put themselves back together. When court resumed, the judge's voice carried a different weight. Mr. Mercer, he said, I am now looking at a man who broke the law for a reason the court can understand, injured an officer in a way the court cannot ignore, and hid his remaining dignity under a coat because he believed the world would rather inspect his failure than honor his service. Daniel said nothing. Caprio continued. I'm also looking at a man who has been refusing help so long it has become part of his identity. That ends today one way or another. That was the warning. The consequence moment. You do not get to use trauma as a shield and pride as a weapon, the judge said. Not against the law, not against the people trying to help you, not against yourself. Daniel's lower lip trembled once, barely. Caprio turned to Pike. Mr. Prosecutor, given the full footage, the immediate transfer of the coats to minors in need, and the witness testimony, what is the city's position on the property charge? Pike stood slower this time, less polished, more human. The city, he said carefully, would move to amend the theft count to unauthorized removal with mitigating circumstances and recommend dismissal upon restitution and compliance, rather than a finding of guilty, if the court deems it appropriate. You could almost hear the internet if this were live. Because even the prosecutor had shifted. Not out of weakness. Out of exposure to fuller truth. Caprio nodded, And the trespass. City leaves that to the court's discretion. The resisting charge. Pike glanced at Officer Grant. The city maintains concern, but recognizes the medical and psychological context. Grant stood before Caprio called her. "Your Honor, may I say something?" "You may." She faced Daniel, not the bench. "When I wrote Is report," she said, "I wrote it like I'd met a suspect. I did not write it like I'd met a wounded man. That doesn't make the shove okay. It doesn't erase what happened. But I want the record to reflect that after seeing the full footage and hearing the testimony, I do not believe Mr. Mercer intended to harm me personally. I believe he reacted from panic and then made bad decisions. I also believe he owes this court proof that panic will never again be allowed to decide for him." That was forgiveness without naivete. Exactly the kind that feels rare because it asks for change, not sentiment. Daniel's eyes filled for the first time all morning. Caprio looked at him. "Do you have proof to offer?" Daniel frowned faintly, as if he didn't understand. "Proof," the judge repeated, "that the man under the coat is stronger than the one hiding behind it." And that question led straight to the ultimate confrontation, the one around which the whole hearing had been building. Daniel stood there in his dress blues beneath the torn outer coat and said the most dangerous thing a proud man can say. "No." The room stiffened. He went on. "Not today. I don't have proof. I have intentions. I have guilt. I got letters and medals and a dead wife and a nervous system that breaks in public. But proof? No, sir." Caprio nodded slowly. "Good answer." People looked confused. The judge leaned forward. "Because false promises are cheaper than winter gloves, I'm not interested in your intentions. I'm interested in your choices after you walk out that door." Then he laid out the path. Not easy. Not performative. Real. The property count will be continued for 90 days and dismissed if Hathaway's is reimbursed the recorded inventory value, which the court calculates at $37.98. Before Daniel could speak, Teresa Bell stood up. "I can pay that." Caprio lifted a hand. "Sit down, Ms. Bell." Then Angela Ruiz stood. "Our shelter can cover it." Caprio shook his head. "No." Everyone waited. He looked back at Daniel. "You will reimburse it yourself, not because you are a thief, because responsibility finishes what motive starts." Another line worth remembering. "As for the trespass count," Caprio said, "that will be filed and dismissed on condition that you engage with authorized outreach rather than unilateral rescue operations behind loading docks." There was a ripple of relieved laughter. Then the judge's face set again. "The resisting charge is more serious. You injured an officer. That matters in this courtroom. I am ordering 6 months of supervised veterans trauma counseling through the Providence VA mobile unit, 20 hours of service at St. Agnes Shelter in a non-custodial role approved by Ms. Ruiz, and a written apology delivered to Officer Grant and her daughter, not because the child was present, but because harm in a family never stops with the person first hit by it." Officer Grant blinked fast. Daniel looked stunned. But Caprio was not done. "There will also be no jail today." The room exhaled. Because this court believes a cage is not treatment, and humiliation is not justice. That line almost cracked the room in half. People sat straighter. Some cried harder. Even Evan Pike looked down. Yet the judge had one more twist. "However," he said, "if Mr. Mercer misses treatment, refuses placement, or disappears from contact, the court will revisit every count with no romantic stories left to tell. I will not be manipulated by your suffering. I will be moved by your effort." Daniel nodded once, tears finally breaking free. Caprio looked at Angela Ruiz. "Can housing be arranged?" Angela answered immediately. We have a transitional veterans bed opening tomorrow at Harbor House. Single occupancy. Ground floor. Door near exit, if he agrees. All eyes went to Daniel. There it was. The breakthrough. Not whether the judge would save him. Whether he would allow himself to be saved enough to change. Daniel stared at the bench, then at the gallery, then at the letters pinned inside his coat. Finally he said, "If the room has a door I can see, I'll take it." Teresa sobbed. Tommy grinned through tears. Ava clapped once before realizing court probably wasn't a clapping place. Even Caprio smiled at that. But just when it seemed the emotional peak had passed, the unexpected twist around the 7,000-word mark hit harder than anyone imagined. Dr. Hale quietly asked permission to clarify one medical issue. Caprio nodded. Dr. Hale said, "Your Honor, one more matter bears on urgency. Mr. Mercer recently declined pulmonary imaging despite repeated recommendation. The mobile clinic nurse reported blood in sputum and worsening exertional breath. He should not be sleeping outdoors. Frankly, he should have been evaluated weeks ago." The judge looked sharply at Daniel. "Is that true?" Daniel answered with the exhausted honesty of someone already stripped bare. "Yes." "How long have you been coughing blood?" "On end." "Off." "How long?" "Maybe 2 months." The room fell right back into alarm. Teresa whispered, "Oh my God." Caprio's expression hardened. "And you intended to tell no one." Daniel gave a small shrug that looked more like surrender. Didn't seem worth the paperwork. That line angered the judge for the first time. "Worth the paperwork," Caprio snapped. "You stood here in front of this court dressed like sacrifice wrapped in pride, and you're telling me your life is not worth paperwork." Daniel flinched. Good. He needed to. Because there are moments when mercy has to arrive with force. Caprio pointed at him. "Listen to me. The medals under that coat are not relics. They are evidence that your life was once considered worth protecting by an entire nation. Do not insult the dead by treating your survival like an administrative inconvenience." No one in that courtroom will ever forget that line. Daniel broke. Not neatly. Not cinematically. He bent forward with both hands over his face and cried the way men cry when the walls finally fail. Shoulder to shoulder, breath catching, whole body shaking, not loud at first. Then one sound escaped him that made half the room look away out of respect. "I got tired," he said into his hands. "I just got tired." There it was. Not weakness. The truth under the truth. Years of grief, cold, guilt, pain, nights outside, mornings inside waiting rooms he could not bear, children needing coats, officers grabbing arms, managers protecting procedure, a dead wife, a missing daughter, and underneath it all the terrible fatigue of staying alive one day longer than you planned to. Officer Grant reached for tissues before Alina did. Angela Ruiz moved closer. Teresa Bell cried openly now. Ava stepped out of her mother's hold, walked 3 small steps toward Daniel, and held up the sleeve of the pink coat still on her body. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "you forgot to zip me before." That shattered whatever restraint was left. The courtroom laughed through tears. Daniel knelt as much as his bad knees allowed, hands still shaking, and zipped the coat carefully to her chin. It was the most camera-ready moment of the day. The one everyone knew would go viral. Not because it was polished. Because it was true. A child in a coat, a veteran on one knee, a judge watching, a whole room discovering that dignity can survive catastrophe but not alone. Before the resolution, drop a comment telling us whether you think Judge Caprio made the right call. Caprio let the moment settle, then did something unexpected himself. He asked Marcus Doyle to retrieve the small lockbox used for fine payments. Marcus brought it up. The judge opened it, removed $38 from his own wallet, and placed it inside. "This is not a gift," he said. "It is a loan from the court of conscience. Mr. Mercer, you will repay it to St. Agnes Shelter within 90 days, not to me, to the place where warmth was waiting while paperwork slept." Daniel looked speechless. "You understand?" "Yes, sir." "Good." Caprio turned to Pike. "Make the record reflect immediate medical referral following this hearing." Then to Officer Grant. "Would you object if the defendant's first service hour were today, under supervision, assisting Ms. Bell with transport from court to clinic?" Grant answered without hesitation, "No objection." Teresa shook her head in disbelief. "Wait," she said, voice trembling. "You mean he can come with us?" Caprio said, "If Mr. Mercer is willing, and if Dr. Hale confirms transport to evaluation afterward." Daniel nodded before anyone.